When my brother Ronnie told me he was running for Congress, I asked him if he'd gone crazy. I said, "You've got everything you worked so hard to achieve around you. Your truck farm running like clockwork, friends, family, all your kids and grandkids. Why would you want to give that up to go swimming in a shark tank?" He smiled and replied that was exactly why he was running, because he wanted his grandkids to have the same kind of life as his. But if Congress kept up the way it was going, there might not be anything left for them. He said that somebody with some common sense had to go up there, and he had the time and the inclination. Then he said that he believed the people of the 2nd District would respond to somebody who offered to do the job on that basis. As I drove home, I thought about what he had said and asked myself why common sense is so rare in Washington. And I realized that common sense doesn't come from talking about problems, but from experience, from the successes and failures that teach us not to make the same mistake twice. And experience is at the heart of Ronnie's common sense. More than anyone else on the ballot, Ronnie has been there and done that, and learned the lessons only first-hand experience offers. Here are some examples. When our current congressional representative was in grade school, Ronnie was a medical corpsman at Dak To in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. During the fiercest fighting of the war, he was in the hospital at Chu Lai, working to keep the wounded alive. He learned from that experience that our representatives should think long and hard before they commit American lives and American tax dollars to try to win other people's fights for them. And he learned about physical and psychological trauma and our duty to take care of suffering vets. When the congressman was in junior high, Ronnie was running a small business, and not just signing checks to workers, but actually taking responsibility for all the jobs himself. After his service, he went out to the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State and took up working in the woods as a logger. A year or so later, he and a friend bid a job doing pre-commercial thinning of trees for the state. Ronnie learned the ropes that year, and the next year started the family tree, a partnership of 4 of us that grew to 6. We were all getting shares, so we shared the responsibility for making sure everything got done. But it was always Ronnie who got there first. Ronnie who scouted and bid the jobs, did the paperwork, met with the compliance officers, made sure we had supplies, that things were in working order. And it was Ronnie who saw started first in the morning. He just got there first. After a while, the rest of us learned to count on it. So when it comes to being a small businessman, Ronnie's not just the guy who writes the checks and pockets the profit. He knows business the way people of the district do. The clerks, the sales staff, the maintenance crew, the office managers, the people who actually do the work. No matter what your position, you can bet Ronnie is working as hard as you are. By the time the congressman had made it to high school, Ronnie was down here on the Ohio, doing his best to make a living on what was left of Uncle Blanchard's family farm. 10 acres of worn-out dirt that had turned into a dogwood thicket full of briars, vines, and copperheads. He worked in the woods as he cleared land and built a shack to winter in with a wife and 2 babies. Back then, I remember seeing him, home from working all day in the woods, hoeing beans in the moonlight. After a few years, it was clear he was going to need more income to raise his family and build a farm. So he applied for an opening as a worker for ODNR at Shawnee State Forest, which was conveniently all around him. He worked for the forest for a quarter of a century, and everybody there was glad, for 2 good reasons. Ask anyone who worked with him and they'll agree. First, if it was a hard and nasty job, Ronnie was the first one in the hole. If it only took one person to do whatever it was Ronny who stepped up first. Second was his constant good humor. He could make a dog laugh, as one of his co-workers said, and he was generally the butt of his own jokes. Being around Ronny made the day go faster and the workload lighter. Later he became the head carpenter, but when the superintendent of roads and bridges retired, the bosses never replaced him. They just had the most experienced workers do the job. It was the head forester who decided the bridge needed replaced. But it was Ronny, along with a few others who knew how things worked, who gathered the tools and materials, ordered the concrete and culvert, and made sure the job got done. And it did. In addition to all that, Ronny was the union chapter rep, doing everything he could to save jobs. When he retired, he just stepped on the gas. In addition to playing in 2 bands, he built a smokehouse, a greenhouse, a sugar shack, a cider press, and broke new ground to grow more vegetables to sell in town, along with his syrup and jams and eggs and homemade bread. And that's experience too. The kind that lets you know that your representative is an everyday person, made uncommon only by his intense energy, his compassionate decency, and his willingness to serve. You will be using common sense if you give him a chance. And the best way to give him a chance is to let your neighbors know that they finally have a horse in the race.